The Inn at Shillingford by John Connill. There had long been an inn at Shillingford. The village lay at a crossroads, secondary roads now, but once the main arteries from north to south and east to west in this part of the country. The coming of the big A roads rendered the town less important than once it was, but it was the motorways blindly scything through the countryside, blighting and polluting, that finally sounded the death knell for Shillingford and its sole sources of bed and board. The inn sat forgotten at the top of a small hill, some half-mile beyond the eastern edge of the village, a relic of another age. Only a wooden sign, half devoured by damp and rot, indicated to the passing traveler that this was once a place to eat and rest briefly upon life's journey. But had that traveler taken the time to follow the overgrown road up the hill, he might have noticed something strange about the old stone building. The faint smell of burning that still hung around it, the blackening of its walls, the scorched holes in its slate roof. Perhaps, after all, it was not the motorways that brought an end to the hospitality offered by the inn. Perhaps also, if one were to listen to local gossip, one might learn that the fire that destroyed the inn at Shillingford was not accidental, but was set deliberately, although even the most tenacious of investigators would find it difficult to obtain sufficient evidence to ascribe blame for the incident. In truth, a great many people had been present on the night that the inn burned, so that the responsibility for what occurred might justifiably be termed collective. Note the use of that word, responsibility, not guilt. No one ever felt guilt for destroying the inn at Shillingford, and no regret showed upon their faces as the building and its innkeeper succumbed to the flames. The police looked into the matter, of course, aided by the local constable, who helped in every way to ensure that the verdict reached in the demise of the innkeeper, Joseph Long, was one of accidental death. And why did he have to die? That, sadly, is another story, and one that needs not concern here. Suffice it to say that a number of young women disappeared in the locality, and suspicions about the disappearance centered on the innkeeper. There was never sufficient proof to charge him with anything, and no bodies were ever found. It was said, though, that many a hungry traveler had complimented Mr. Long on his meat pies, remarking to him that they had a distinctive, although not unpleasant taste. Mr. Long, with a bashful smile, would claim credit for them, explaining that he cooked them himself in the kitchen. Vegetarians, it must be said, found the cuisine at the inn somewhat limited, although, as someone once blackly remarked, while there might not have been vegetables in the pies, it was quite possible that they might have been vegetarians in there. The inn at Shillingford was, in effect, a one-man operation. Joseph Long made the beds in its 6 modest rooms and farmed out the used linen to a woman in the village who would deliver them back, crisp and clean, 3 times every week. Long had once been married, although he claimed that he and his wife did not get along and that she subsequently left him and went to live in France. Once again, local gossip suggested that she was known to offer her favors to guests at the inn and had been punished by her husband for her infidelity, her remains disposed of in a bathtub. For a guest at the inn was once heard to say that the bath in room 3 was scarred by what he felt certain were acid burns. And so the inn was consumed, and Joseph Long died along with it. Curiously, the village itself began to die not long after, as its young people left and its old people stayed, moving from house to shop, shop to church, and finally church to cemetery, where they made their final homes. Few lights burned in Shillingford, and those travelers who were unfortunate enough to be forced to negotiate its single cracked main street often found themselves shivering slightly at the bleakness of the place. Then, in the final years of the last century, Shillingford became the recipient of some much-needed good fortune. An amusement park was established outside Morningdale, a town 5 miles to the west, with vertiginous roller coasters and nausea-inducing rides. The road between Morningdale and the motorway was upgraded, and as Shillingford was the only village on the route, it also benefited from the improvements. In addition to the road, new houses came to be built and small stores opened in the hope of gaining both local and passing trade. And a man named Vincent Penny bought and restored the inn at Shillingford and celebrated its grand reopening with an invitation to the villagers to come and enjoy a complimentary drink and some cocktail sausages. The villagers of Shillingford, never once to turn down something for nothing, duly made the trek up to the inn, enjoyed Mr. Penny's largesse for as long as it took them to finish the sausages, then promptly left and never returned again. Their brief visit simply confirmed them in their view that there was something wrong with the inn at Shillingford, and no amount of fancy carpeting and wood paneling would ever make it right again. Thus, it was that, while Shillingford slowly prospered, Mr. Penny's investment appeared destined to go unrewarded. During the summer months he made a small profit, and during the winter months he made a large loss. The 5 rooms above the bar were never fully occupied, and those guests who chose to spend the night complained of bad smells and problems with the plug holes, which spat filthy water when the hot taps were turned on. 2 years after the grand opening, Vincent Penny decided to sell up and cut his losses, assuming he could find anyone to take the place off his hands. When no such buyer could be found, Mr. Penny closed the inn and departed for Spain. He left the matter in the hands of his solicitors, who quickly relegated its sale to the lower regions of the list of priorities, from which it was unlikely ever to rise. It is gin. Some water, baby. You're not lying. It was shortly after 11 on a cold November night when Mr. Adam Teal found himself on Shillingford's once very depressing Main Street, now transformed into a vaguely depressing Main Street. Beside him on the passenger seat of his car lay a very old and very outdated guide to this part of the countryside, left to him by his retired predecessor, Mr. Ormond. Teal was that rarest of rare birds, an insurance salesman with a conscience, which meant that he was more popular with his clients than he was with his employers, a situation that had led to his transfer from London to the countryside, so that he might sell less potentially ruinous insurance to the kind of people who kept their money in biscuit tins amid stale crumbs and mouse droppings. But, as is the case with men who pride themselves on a particular virtue, Teal had a particular vice with which to balance it. He was, in that quaint phrase, a ladies' man, and found that his job occasionally offered him the opportunity to indulge his tastes for relatively anonymous liaisons. Teal was not married, and so viewed these flirtations as mostly harmless, the scrupulous manner in which he approached his work further enabling him to convince himself that they were not the symptoms of some greater moral decay. Nevertheless, today had been another unprofitable day in a string of unprofitable days, which hung heavily about Teal's neck like a noose. Now he was tired and hungry, and his guidebook informed him that the only lodging within 30 miles apart from deserted amusement park hotels was located in the small hamlet of Shillingford. Teal followed the directions in the book, and it was not long before he came to a winding road marked by a decaying sign. It curved through thick forest until it came at last to the little inn. Lights burning in its downstairs windows, but not, it seemed, in any of the upstairs rooms. Teal parked his car, removed his overnight bag from the back seat, and knocked loudly on the door. After a short time, he heard the sound of a key turning in the lock, and the door opened wide to reveal the remains of a fire, smoldering in a small hearth, a trio of armchairs surrounding it, and a reception desk to the right with 5 alcoves behind it, 4 of which contained a numbered key. The key to the 3rd room was absent. A man peered from behind the door. He was taller than Teal by about a foot, and his face was mostly obscured by a thick beard and unruly hair. He wore an overcoat over his nightshirt, and his feet were bare and encrusted with dirt. Come in, he said. You're most welcome indeed. Teal entered, and the innkeeper closed the door behind him. You're number 2, he said, and handed Teal a key with that number carved upon its head. Don't you want me to register? Asked Teal. No need, said the innkeeper. You're the only guest and it's late. Best that you get to your room now and worry about such things in the morning. The salesman did not protest. He followed the innkeeper to the second floor of the inn, where he was shown into a huge but only adequately furnished room with a double bed, a battered armchair, and a wardrobe sufficient to accommodate the assorted costumes of a moderately sized theatrical troupe. An open door led into a bathroom which contained a shower stall and bath, a toilet, and an enormous wash basin. To the right of the basin was a connecting door leading to the room next door. Curious, thought Teal. He checked the door, but it was securely locked. There was no key in the keyhole. Sleep well, Mr. Teal, said the innkeeper from his post at the bedroom door, and so grateful was the guest for a room and a warm bed that he did not even think to ask how the innkeeper had discovered his name. Instead, he requested some food and was promised a plate of bread and assorted cheeses and a large pot of tea. We're out of pies, explained the innkeeper. Can't get the ingredients. With that, he left to assemble his guest's modest repast. Teal prepared himself for bed and was already half asleep on his feet when he heard the sound of a tray being placed on the floor outside his door, accompanied by a soft knocking. When he reached the door, the innkeeper was gone, but there was food waiting and a steaming metal pot of strong tea. He had a little of the bread and cheese and permitted himself a single cup of milky tea before retiring for the night.